Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me today is John Cameron and Jason McPhee. Gentlemen, we've got some interesting news this week. Britain's National Healthcare Service is starting to collapse under its own weight, and for many of us, we've kind of predicted this was only a matter of time, right? Eventually, as what Margaret Thatcher said, you eventually run out of other people's money. And when you have politicians making healthcare decisions, it never leads to a quality outcome. So what do you think of, Jason?
Well, I think this is the problem you always get into when you're dealing with scarce goods, is that there's only so many ways to distribute them, and you've either got lines, which we've all seen when you start to run short on things, or maybe some kind of a lottery system. Maybe planners decide who gets what, or use the price signal to figure it out. And the price signal works a heck of a lot better than just about any other system. So, unfortunately, most people just sort of aren't educated that way to think about things that way. So, we often wind up going with these systems that planners like, and it usually ends badly after given enough time.
Yeah, I have some familial experience with this. My wife is English, so my mother-in-law is English, and she just moved here from England 3 years ago on the 14th of February, and she's had a knee replaced under National Health Service in England, and she has a porcine valve. Is that a pig valve? Not artificial, but in her heart. She had to wait, I think, 18 months for her knee and over a year for her heart valve. And this was 10 years ago when NHS wasn't crumbling as much as it is now. They have people waiting for ambulances for what we would call emergencies for over an hour in many cases. When people get to the ED, they call it the ED there, emergency department. Same thing Kaiser calls it. Sometimes it takes them over an hour to be seen. Actually, no, sometimes it takes them 10 hours to be seen at the emergency room. Doctors and nurses are leaving, left and right. They're suffering burnout. But people in England, they love their national health because it was one of the first ones, and it's been their pride and joy for years. And they just don't understand that they're going to have to pay a whole lot more for it, or accept a whole lot less, or both, probably both. And because one of the reasons the healthcare is so expensive here is that people in the healthcare business are paid about 30% more for the same job as anybody anywhere else. And because of the monopoly and all the rest of that. And so you'd have to turn, I think it's like 18% of the workforce in this country is in healthcare. If you wanted to save some money, you'd have to turn them all upside down and shake them. 18% is a big voting block. Yeah, there's no competition. So their nurses are paid probably half of what nurses are paid here, doctors, about the same thing. So their system's been much more affordable than ours. And also their civil servants were until recently the cream of the crop. Because there was so much pride in the civil service in England, you had to be pretty sharp to get in. And so despite all of that, it's crumbling quickly, and it's crumbling everywhere else. It's crumbling in Canada. They're rationing healthcare there, and basically putting old people down. Their doctors are making suggestions that they might want to look at physician-assisted suicide rather than do treatment.
Well, what's funny, one of the things they mentioned in the story that I read on this was one of the people were saying it wouldn't matter how much money is spent on this, the system is just turning into disaster. And they made an insight, and it's because the people wouldn't know where to spend the money properly, and that's part of the reason why price signals and a market is so much better, because this way you've got this constant direction of what people need, and that's where the prices sort of shift.
Market is always better, always has been. Mirrors nature.
Well, because you've got politicians who will respond to political pressure rather than actual needs. What's the cause celeb of the day, rather than, okay, what are our actual needs going to be going today and in the future? But that's not how decisions are made. Certain type of cancer becomes, politically expedient, so you spend all kinds of money researching solutions for that particular cancer, when general research may have been a better avenue for that type of for that research dollars, because maybe then you could have actually found a real solution. A lot of the times this money gets spent on such a narrow focus that you actually can never really solve the problems they're looking for, because they're looking at too small of a solution. Whether it's spend so much money, be it vaccines or be it different treatment or surgery, it doesn't really matter what the narrow focus is. When government has the money, you write your research grants based upon what you think the government's going to pay you for, and so you end up with a very narrow avenue of research, which is what happens when you get politics involved in these things. It's just kind of
in anything, especially in healthcare. Yeah.
And talk about politics getting involved and making things worse. A crisis of youth. We've got, our youth are in trouble. I think we all know this, but it plays out here. The numbers are, the deaths of young people are increasing at a rate that can't be explained by things like COVID. We've got overdoses, suicides, and health issues, kind of surprising health issues for people so young, have exploded in the last 3 years. And this big government locking people away, not having access to routine medical care, all the various issues, school districts that don't really fill the needs of an individual student. They fill the needs of this mythical average student that doesn't exist. And so we pump all these kids through who are already having a difficult time, either emotionally or educationally, and then you stick them into an environment that does not suit them. And what do we expect is going to happen? And you've got kids in school, so I think maybe you're the one to actually bring this up to first.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned COVID, because it's not so much that COVID was the issue, it was the lockdowns, I think, for a lot of these people. I mean, if you're a kid and you're going through life, you got a lot of changes going on, and, rites of passage, all kinds of milestones coming up from you, and all of a sudden, all that stuff just uprooted in your life for a couple of years. And for kids, this stuff's happening fast, right? I mean, there's no getting back last year. That's a milestone that's passed already.
2 years in California.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for each year, there's no getting back the last one for these kids. And so, I mean, if you missed a graduation, you missed that big dance, all these different things, those things are just long gone. And the sad thing is that for kids, the risk was it's almost like we took the group
almost non-existent.
Yeah, so for the group that had almost no risk, they took some of the heaviest burdens, and they also took a lot of the burden of the debt that's going to be that's going to have to be paid back on all this stuff too.
Really? Shocked by that. Oh, you mean some people are actually thinking that they're going to pay this back? I think you're an optimist there. And this is just, you think it's bad now, especially the mental health issues. Wait until, because children depend upon tone and body language and facial expression, and they're as social as a pack of puppies. And that was taken away from especially small children. And now, they've been made afraid of something that they don't understand, that actually wasn't a threat to them. More kids died of the flu than COVID. It's just like school shootings. I think more kids die from bee stings by about a factor of 10 than do in school shootings. But you're right. The youth were impacted by it, and that gap in their growth. New York Times says, oh, they lost 6 months. Not in California, they didn't. They lost a couple of years. In other places, they might have lost 6 months, but they didn't. England didn't do this, Canada didn't do this, Europe didn't do this, Japan
much shorter
didn't
periods,
do it. They might have done it for a little bit. What they did is if a kid tests positive in the pod they were in, they send people home, despite the fact that kids, when they get COVID, don't get very sick. And that was even with the pretty pretty deadly initial strains until they mutated out. So, and this is again, a lot of this information is from MSN, and MSN's leans towards studies that favor big government. It's not as bad as CNN, but then again, I think only 6 people watch CNN now. So
yeah, well, before we leave the subject real quick, I thought this was a really telling thing. The Daily Wire put together this short video where they talked about the Super Bowl. It was right around the time of the Super Bowl, and they still had mask mandates going on in Los Angeles at that time, and so that covered the Super Bowl as well. And so they showed the juxtaposition, I guess, of what was going on in daycare centers with these, little 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds having to strap on these masks and just crying and running around, and these essentially these things are just getting filthy all day for these little kids because they're not sure how to wear. And then they flip over to the Super Bowl, keep going back and forth, and here are all the celebrities, all the politicians, the people who were mandating this stuff and telling everybody to wear. None of them were wearing them, and here they all are in this.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
By that.
So.
And one of the things we should think about is when you talk about children, a year for a 10-year-old is a 10th of their life. A year for a 50-year-old is a 50th, right? It's such a small part of our development, but also it's a fundamental time of their development. They're actually learning how the world interacts, learning how to interact with the world. They're experimenting, and we essentially took all that away from them. And as we point out here at the time, we had target fixation issues. We were so fixated on COVID and its consequences that we didn't even think about the consequences of our response to it. And now we're paying the price, or more specifically, our children are paying the price. And more price is being paid. California has now been discovered to house, that's an interesting word, half of the United States homeless. Man, I'm just butchering my words here. All right, let's try this one again. California has half of the U.S. homeless population existing in it. And California is not the only place with good weather. So weather cannot be the excuse. It's a traditional excuse why California has more and more homeless because, the weather's nice here. But Florida, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, Arizona, all these places have nice weather that the homeless can go out and live in. So why is California having such a hard problem? And part of the reason is, housing costs are astronomical. Here in Sacramento, to build a new house, it's $100,000 just for permits. That's not even talking about the time it takes to get stuff approved. That's just for permits. So your new house you buy is $100,000 more expensive than it has to be.
Yeah, the average permit price in the Midwest is less than $10,000 unless you're in one of the real deep blue cities, in which case it's crazy high.
Yeah.
There's heavy homelessness in New York City, and you can't say that's got good weather. Or in New York, it's a blue state issue. And one of the reasons that we've talked about this over and over and over again, the homelessness industrial complex. San Francisco spends $1 billion a year on homelessness, and if you divide it up by the people that are homeless there, that's like $100,000 per person.
When they spend more and they get more for their money.
Yeah.
Spend more.
So I mean, I could house somebody just fine for half of that.
Yeah, it's the bureaucratic state is making homelessness worse, but there's also the 20 years in California, 20 years of anti-growth policies. You have politicians who essentially limit the ability for small and medium developers to build houses, and you only get these big, huge mega developments that take 10 years to build. Well, you're going to end up with high housing prices. You're going to end up with high cost of living, and then those people who are most vulnerable, those who have emotional issues or economic issues, the minute anything happens, their world is knocked out from underneath them. And I know down the street from my house, they closed a bunch of the last end motels. And then literally a week later, we had people tenting on the streets. This is not a surprise to some of us. And so the real problem is there's no accountability. We have the same politicians keep getting reelected time and time again and then pretend they weren't part of the problem. And we have to find some way to do something about that. That's ultimately the solution.
Well, it's if anybody wants to go look at the statistics on this, HUD puts out a study every year on this, and so it's an annual report. And you can actually see the comparison between the states like you were alluding to there, John. And for the most part, it is a blue state problem. And for those red states, it's sort of concentrated in the blue cities, those red states. And the only exception to that kind of outlier is Alaska for some reason, which is kind of funny. And you were talking about the weather issue, but I think with Alaska, it might have something to do with the fact that everybody gets a check there. So.
Yeah, and then Alaska. Once you say weather's the issue, but once you've got some basic structure, a roof over your head, and you've lived in cold weather for a while, unless you're passed out on heroin, you know how to keep yourself alive in that weather if you've got a structure, and even a nice tent, unless it's, well, anyway, we could go on and on and on, but I mean, you can survive if you know your territory. You can survive there, and the weather. I'm not saying it becomes a non-issue, especially if you're mentally impaired, which is what a lot of our people are here, because in California they thought they were being mean to people to have them institutionalized when they couldn't take care of themselves, so they turned them out on the streets. And turns out they weren't being mean; they were just condemning them to a death on the streets.
It's a different way. Some of those places, they weren't institutionalized. They were being housed in prisons.
Yeah.
And then, so we kind of jumped the shark
no, I
on
know,
that.
yeah,
We went from one extreme to the other.
Yeah,
rather than
I'm not saying they were.
I'm
not saying they were all perfect, but to say that because somebody's institutionalized, it's bad, because there were a lot of great institutions in places. People that get into that business, deeply care about other people, and just because there was one or two bad apples doesn't mean you close down that whole system, because then you just transfer the cost and the pain and the suffering somewhere else. And the pavement doesn't know how to take care of somebody who's schizophrenic.
By the way, as a quick shot on the numbers, even though California has grossly the most numbers per capita, it's the District of Columbia is the worst. Go figure.
You could say that about a lot of things. I mean,
big government is
crime, street crime, burglary, drug overdoses, car theft. I'm trying
lying,
to think.
abuse of power.
No.
Speaking of lying and abuse of power, the Biden administration is placing undercover federal agents at universities, allegedly to try and find catch these universities engaging in fraudulent activity against the students. But that really doesn't make any sense to me, because you could look for that fraudulent activity through books. You don't through the what's the word I'm looking for? Accounting. Do basic accounting. I can't think of the name. Anyway.
A little auditing.
Yeah, a little auditing.
Okay.
Yeah, a little auditing, some accounting, forensic accounting. That's the word I was looking for. Through some forensic accounting, you can look for the fraud for that. So why would they be placing federal agents in universities? I don't know. It seems to me like they want federal agents in universities to kind of spy on students and what's going on. Maybe I'm being a little cynical. Maybe I'm being a little conspiratorial here, but I just don't trust any government agency to be putting federal agents in schools for any reason, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think it'd be, but I guess what they say is they need to do, have federal agents pose as students so they can see what kind of promises are being made to them by the school, like graduation rates and costs, and will you be employed after you get our degree, and what's the value of the degree, and all the rest of that, because they don't want them to make promises they can't keep. But that's the
do that with a secret shopper.
Well,
it's funny. That's what they compared them to in the article.
But you don't need a federal agent to be a secret shopper.
No, you could. I know plenty of students. You just pay them a little stipend, right? They're like they're.
Here's $50. Report back.
Yeah, report back to me. Yeah. And report back honestly, and it's $100. Lie and you're going to jail. No. So. There again, federal agents have the gold-plated. what's more dear than gold? Platinum? No, iridium? I don't know. Their health care, their retirement, and once you create a job for them, you can't ever get rid of it. So, yeah, if you're really concerned about it, just pay some students.
Yeah.
Well, but to me, the real scandal here is that the government keeps spending more and more money on this, and students keep winding up in worse and worse debt. I mean, we just had this, I guess this was just at the Supreme Court, whether Biden could just give the students, just write off their, their debt. And Bernie Sanders actually was one of the people speaking in front of the on the steps. You know, they had a big rally in front of the Supreme Court while they were had their testimony going, and Bernie laid out what the problem was. He literally said, hey, we've got all these students who are in debt crisis. They're coming out and they can't start their lives, and they can't afford a house, and they can't do this, that, and the other. And then so his answer is to double down and make it free. So just spend even more money on it from the government. But there's
nothing, and that's the thing. There's nothing free. Those students will still end up paying just as much.
More, and the growth in the cost of education has so far outpaced inflation over the last 20 years, especially at the university level. I think administrative costs have gone up in California state universities and California university system an average of 18% a year. You know, you have lots of vice presidents of I have no freaking idea what they're doing. I almost said a different word. And they, if you're a VP, you've got to have a couple of managers working for you and a bunch of other people, and it's like resource specialists in schools. Whoever heard of that? Teachers used to be their own resource specialists, and now in every school district you have, I don't know. San Juan School District had, when I looked at it like 20 years ago, something like 5,000 people working for it that weren't teachers.
Well, it's funny, when you talk about the administrative growth, there was recently, 4 or 5 days ago or something, there was a little bit of a scandal at Stanford where they had they had invited a federal judge to come in and talk to the students. A group on campus had, and so apparently I guess there was this group that was led by, I think they were called the National Lawyers Guild or something like that, and apparently kind of a semi-communist group. But anyways, apparently they had sort of organized a protest, and the person who came in and essentially kind of shouted down the professor was the dean of diversity. So literally, a person who's employed by the school comes in and then tells this invited speaker that he shouldn't be speaking there, and you're literally paying the university an administrator to do that.
And this is Stanford. I mean, fortunately, that's a private university, so you and I aren't bearing the costs of that. So anybody who's thinking about spending the $70,000 to send their kid to Stanford must might want to think.
Loans they got to do it, and then we have to pay for if they get.
Yeah, if they get. Let's not use that word forgiven. What that word should be, the phrase should be, let's make taxpayers pay for the fact that you chose to spend money you didn't have to get a degree that won't earn you the money to pay it off. I mean, if you did that anywhere else, if you took out a loan for a car you couldn't afford, they'd repossess it. But at least a car you can resell. The worthless degrees they're handing out now, you can't resell those.
Well, so the real solution is get the market signals back into higher education.
Well,
real solution to everything.
Even if we allowed students to write it off under bankruptcy, at least then the universities would be left holding a bag. But the universities they have no skin in this game. None at all. No,
because they're being paid with outside money. Yeah. They're being paid with taxpayer money, and they have no, like you said, the market, they have no accountability and no reason to hold costs down, because the banks keep making these loans, and it's free money for
Well,
them.
you know, and the sad thing is that the solution has been out there for a while. I mean, Milton Friedman suggested this, you know, back
Uncle
in the
Milty.
70s or 80s. Exactly, yeah. He said, look, tie the student's future to the college's future, and boy, you'll bet the college will get their priorities right away if they know that, you know, that they're not going to make money if their students aren't making money.
If the college were carrying the debt rather than the taxpayers are carrying the debt, which is what's happening now. We've got time for one more subject, but not a lot of time, so we're going to skip down. Jen Psaki was complaining the other day about Tucker Carlson being dishonest. And quite frankly, it's just funny that we have someone whose literal job is to stand up in front of the nation and sometimes lie, because it's you have to, is now going to complain about other people spreading misinformation and lying. And it's just, some of these jokes write themselves, but I can't even joke about this because it's reached a point where this notion of misinformation is itself become misinformation. You just toss it out as a way to, well, we don't have to talk about it because we're just going to claim it's misinformation.
It was hilarious. It was hilarious that who's the leader of the Senate said that making all of that video available so that people could see what actually happened was a threat to the very nation of the United States of America. So apparently truth and letting people decide for themselves is a threat to the nation. Yeah.
Well, you can't have people making up their own mind. Well, I get what they're afraid of. They're afraid of that selective viewing of certain materials are going to create a false impression. But
like they did at the trials.
Yeah, like their versions of selective editing, selective viewing of the things. It's put as much out there as possible, so as many people as possible can view it all, and you can have as many perspectives come together and express their views, and maybe you can come up with some semblance of truth. But
yeah.
I only want to see one piece of video. Who opened that big gate that can keep a tank out so that people could come in? Who opened those big doors? You can't knock those down with a tank. Who opened them? I want to see that piece of tape.
Well, you know what? One parting shot on Jen Psaki is, you know, my
Please
gosh.
take two.
Well, I mean,
take 2 shots if you get it. Listen to Jen Psaki.
Well, okay, I'll take a shot at both of the press
Psaki
people
and
they've
Carlson.
had.
Yeah.
Well, but just the idea
Yeah,
that,
because
my
Tucker's
gosh,
an idiot too.
well, but my gosh, if you needed an expert in lying, you know, certainly we've seen she has the experience.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us. No, wait, we got 1 minute left. My bad. We're not quite out of time. I don't have an ear today. It's my fault, people. I don't have an ear today. So, but let's not let Tucker off. Because
No.
Tucker Carlson is a cheesehead, right?
You say, well, no, you're
not-
insulting Green Bay fans by calling him a cheesehead.
I'm
No,
a
he's
Swiss cheesehead. How's that?
he's an idiot. He's waffled on stuff. He was pro-Trump. He was anti-Trump. He's
And all that.
Yeah,
He's
We're
certainly
out of time.
anti-libertarian.
he's a liar, and idiot too. Yeah.
And my producer, we might ask me to say something before I got off, but I forgot what he was asking me to say. Oh, like and subscribe if you see these videos. And please remember to love everybody. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you, James.